The exam was about poisonous plants. The human casually asked, edible or weaponized? The examination hall of the Galactic Academy fell into an uncomfortable silence as Professor Zethkar distributed the final assessment papers. The crystalline beings from Zerion clicked their limbs nervously, while the gaseous Vorthak students condensed themselves into tight, anxious clouds. Even the usually confident Drakmarian warriors shifted uneasily in their reinforced seats. Liana Martinez sat calmly at her desk, her dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail, completely unaware of the mounting tension around her. As the only human in the advanced xenobotany program, she had grown accustomed to being the odd one out. You have 3 standard hours to complete this examination on interplanetary toxic flora, Professor Zethkar announced, his 6 eyes scanning the room with the predatory gaze that had made him legendary among students. Remember, these are the most dangerous plants in the known galaxy. One mistake in identification could mean the difference between life and extinction for entire colonies. Can, a young Altarian sitting beside Liana, let out a whistling sigh through his gill slits. His blue-scaled skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality, a sure sign of stress in his species. I spent months memorizing the molecular structures, he whispered to Liana. But there are over 3,000 variants. Liana glanced at her paper and raised her hand. The professor's compound eyes focused on her with barely concealed irritation. Yes, Miss Martinez? Quick question about the test parameters, she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. When you say toxic flora, are we talking about plants that are edible after proper preparation, or are we focusing on the ones that can be weaponized? A collective gasp rippled through the examination room. Several students dropped their writing implements. Can's gills fluttered rapidly, and he stared at Liana, as if she had just declared her intention to wrestle a void leviathan barehanded. Professor Zethkar's exoskeleton made a sharp clicking sound, the Zerion equivalent of a human choking. Excuse me? Well, Liana continued conversationally, seemingly oblivious to the mounting horror around her. Take the Crimson Death, blossom from Kepler 442b, for instance. Everyone thinks it's deadly because of the initial paralytic effects, but if you boil the petals for exactly 47 minutes, strain out the alkaloids, and add them to a protein-rich broth, they're actually quite nutritious. My grandmother used to make something similar with pokeweed back on Earth. The silence that followed was so profound that the environmental system's humming became audible. Or, Liana pressed on, warming to her subject, there's the screaming, Violet from the Andromeda sector. Sure, the pollen causes temporary insanity and violent hallucinations, but if you extract it properly and mix it with the right compounds, it makes an excellent non-lethal crowd control agent, much more humane than traditional riot suppression methods. Can had stopped breathing entirely, his gills sealed shut in what Liana recognized as his species' version of playing dead. Professor Zethkar's 6 eyes began to blink in an irregular pattern, a sign of extreme cognitive distress. Miss Martinez, he managed, his translator struggling with the emotional undertones of his native language. These plants have been classified as Category Omega threats by the Galactic Health Council. Some of them have caused the evacuation of entire star systems. Liana nodded thoughtfully. Right, that's why proper handling is so important. Like the void strangler vine. People see the necrotic spores and panic, but they don't realize that those same spores, when aged properly, can break down almost any organic matter. They're incredibly useful for waste processing or emergency food preparation if you're stranded. Emergency food preparation? The professor's voice had risen to a pitch that made the universal translator emit feedback squeals. Oh yes, Liana said brightly. My survival training instructor always said there's no such thing as an inedible plant, just insufficient cooking time or improper seasoning. Though I'll admit, some of these interplanetary varieties require more creative approaches than Earth plants. She gestured to her paper. Take question 15, the morning moss from Rigel 7. The test makes it sound terrifying because it releases psychoactive compounds that cause paralyzing despair. But those same compounds are basically concentrated tryptophan analogs. process them correctly, and you've got a natural antidepressant that could treat clinical depression across 17 different species. I actually wrote my thesis proposal on it last semester. A crystalline student in the front row made a sound like breaking glass, the Xerion equivalent of hysterical laughter. Ken finally managed to speak, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Liana," he said carefully, "your species, your people, do you all think like this?" Liana considered this seriously. "Well, not everyone. Some humans are more specialized. My brother focuses mainly on explosives and chemical weapons, while my cousin is more into pharmaceutical applications. But yeah, most of us learn basic resource utilization as kids. It's pretty standard survival knowledge." "Resource utilization," Professor Zethkar repeated slowly, as if the words were foreign to him. "Exactly," Liana beamed. "I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're going to encounter something potentially dangerous, you might as well understand all its possible applications. Knowledge is power, and power should never be wasted." She looked around the room, finally noticing the stares. "Is something wrong? Should I not have asked for clarification?" The professor set down his teaching stylus with a trembling appendage. In his 40 years of academia, he had seen many things. He had witnessed the discovery of new species, the classification of impossible organisms, and the advancement of xenobiological science. But never, not once, had he encountered a species that looked at a catalog of the galaxy's most feared botanical nightmares and saw a menu, a medicine cabinet, and an arsenal all rolled into one. "Miss Martinez," he said finally, his voice carrying a new note of what might have been respect or possibly terror. "Please, just answer the questions as they are written." Liana shrugged and turned her attention to the exam. Around her, the other students tried to refocus on their papers, but they couldn't shake the growing realization that they were sharing a classroom with a representative of a species that didn't just survive in a hostile universe, they thrived in it by turning every threat into an opportunity. As Liana began writing her responses, seamlessly categorizing each deadly plant by its potential applications, Professor Zethkar made a mental note to recommend that the Academy's threat assessment protocols be updated. After all, if humans could look at the galaxy's most dangerous botanical specimens and see resources rather than threats, what did that say about humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy? Perhaps, he mused, watching Liana calmly diagram the optimal extraction methods for plutonian death caps, the rest of the galaxy had been asking the wrong questions all along.